Scout was 11 that year, gray going up past his muzzle into his ears, with a left hind leg that came up half a beat slow on cold mornings. An old fence jump from when he was young and didn't know better. He'd ridden out 40 light years in the cargo hold of an exchange transport rather than be left on a relative's porch back home. And on the first morning of assessment week at Crest Hollow Academy, he lay under my folding chair the same way he used to lie under the kitchen table, like nothing about the universe had changed except the ceiling. Everything else had changed. Crest Hollow Academy sat on the rim of a coalition world called Aldous Verge, a training academy built to take exchange cadets from a dozen member species, run them through one brutal week, and sort them into something the Ledger could use. The Ledger was the registry that mattered out there. Every cadet got a number, a designation, a threat class, before they were allowed past orientation and into the actual coursework. Sidearms were standard kit by the second day. Even the smallest of us wore one on a hip holster, training grade, because the instructors said an unarmed cadet on Aldous Verge was a cadet who hadn't been listening, and a cadet who hadn't been listening didn't last the term. My family had argued about bringing Scout for most of a year. He was old, the transit was rough on old joints, and there was a reasonable chance, my father pointed out more than once, that I'd come home from this program and Scout wouldn't be there waiting. I told him I'd rather have 18 months than none. The exchange program had a clause for emotional support animals, and Scout had a vest, and the vet on the transport gave him a clean enough bill of health, and that was that. The vest read Companion Animal, Emotional Support Clearance. Under the species line, somebody had typed, Companion Class, Negligible. I remember thinking it was a strange word to put on a dog who'd once pulled my little brother out of a creek by the collar of his jacket. Negligible. I didn't argue. Nobody argues with a clipboard on the first week anywhere. The line for assessment ran the length of the yard, a long strip of packed orange dirt under Aldous Verge's pale, distant sun. Tholith hatchlings, broad and scaled, already taller than the instructors at 12 years old. A scatter of human exchange kids like me, trying not to look as small as we felt. And near the back, alone, an Enix cadet named Pell, thin as a reed, all eyes, the kind of quiet that comes from being the only one of your kind in a room 100 times over and learning, every time, exactly how that goes. Tholith hatchlings sort dominance the way some dogs sort a yard, early, loudly, without much subtlety, and almost always on whoever in the group looks like they won't push back. Drask Yor was the biggest of the hatchlings, and somewhere between the dormitory and breakfast, he decided Pell was the bottom of whatever order he was building for himself before lunch. It started small, a shove that could have been an accident, if you were generous, which nobody in that line was anymore by the third day. A name repeated that wasn't an accident at all. By the time the queue had shuffled forward another 10 feet, Drask had Pell backed against the registry table, one clawed hand braced on the wood above the smaller cadet's head, talking low in a voice pitched to carry exactly as far as it needed to, and not an inch further. The instructors were 2 stations down, heads bent over a scanner, and the policy on Aldous Verge, I learned this only that morning, in the worst possible way to learn a policy, was that staff did not physically intervene in cadet hierarchy disputes during assessment. Verbal de-escalation only. Let them sort it out themselves. That was supposedly the point of the week. Nobody had written a line in that policy for what to do when the sorting went wrong in front of 50 witnesses, and nobody armed in that yard wanted to be the one who drew first over a shove. I didn't move. I was 13, and scared, and my hand had found the grip of my own sidearm without my permission, and I had no idea what I would have done with it if it had come to that. Scout got up. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He came out from under my chair at the pace of an old dog with somewhere mildly interesting to be, walked the length of the yard past 2 instructors who would never in 100 years have thought to stop a negligible, and sat himself down directly between Drask Yor's planted feet and Pell's, close enough that his shoulder brushed the smaller cadet's knee. Then he did the thing he always did when he'd decided, in whatever way dogs decide these things, that a room was, on balance, fine. He yawned, settled his weight back onto his haunches, and looked up. Drask looked down at him the way you'd look at something that had wandered onto a stage by mistake. "Move," he said, and when the dog didn't, he reached down to do it himself, a backhand, casual, the kind of gesture you make at something you've already decided, weighs nothing, and costs you nothing to brush aside. His hand stopped 6 inches short. I've asked Tholith biologists about it since, and they still don't fully agree on the mechanism. Something in the hindbrain, they think, some leftover wiring from a homeworld, with its own old, patient things that never had to growl before they did anything. All I know is what I saw. Scout didn't flinch, didn't show a tooth, didn't so much as break the low, unhurried half-wag he'd been doing since he sat down. He just kept looking up at Drask with the flat, unbothered patience of a dog who has met louder things than a hatchling and is still here. And Drask's arm hung in the air like it had genuinely forgotten what it was for. Nobody moved for a 4 count. I know because I counted it, badly, the way you count anything when your own heart is doing the counting for you. Then Drask took his hand back, slowly, and stepped away from the table, and didn't look at anyone while he did it. Pell slid out through the gap he'd left and sat down hard on the bottom step, and for a second, the only sound in the whole yard was Scout's tail going thump, thump, thump against the dirt. Assessor Holt got there about 10 seconds too late to see any of it, and exactly in time to find a registry table with everyone still standing around it, not talking. She didn't ask what happened. She'd been stationed off-world long enough to recognize the particular silence that follows an old dog deciding something. She crouched down in the orange dirt, looked at Scout for a long moment, looked at the vest, and crossed out a line on her slate with the edge of her thumb. I didn't see the new entry until that evening, when the clearance forms came back through the dormitory terminal. Where it had said companion class, negligible, somebody, Holt I assume, though she never said so to me directly, had written, threat class, undetermined, subject declines to escalate, recommend no further testing. Pell found me at the mess hall that night and didn't say much, which I understood, because there wasn't much that needed saying yet between two people who'd known each other 4 days. He sat across from me and watched Scout under the table for a while, and Scout watched him back with the same flat patience he'd given Drask that morning, like there was no real difference between a threat and a friend, except which way a person was already leaning when the dog looked up. After a minute, Pell reached down, slow, the way you'd reach towards something you weren't entirely sure would let you. Scout let him. By the end of the week, Pell was saving him the gristle off his ration tray without being asked. Drask never tried it again. Not with Pell, not with anyone, not anywhere in front of the dog. He'd glance at Scout sometimes across the yard in the weeks that followed, the way you'd glance at a locked door you didn't remember locking, and look away again fast, before anyone could catch him at it. I think about that yard more than I think about most of what I actually learned at Crest Hollow Academy, and I learned a great deal there over the following 2 years. They spent a whole week teaching 50 cadets how to be measured, by size, by aggression, by the number stamped on a card we'd carry for the rest of our service. Scout never once raised his voice, never showed a tooth, and he ended the only real fight I saw that entire first year without anyone laying a hand on anyone else, simply by refusing to be moved by something that expected to be obeyed. The ledger had a category for every kind of violence a cadet on that world might offer somebody else. It never did figure out what to do with an old dog who simply would not move. And 40 years on, as far as I can tell, neither did Drask Ure.